Hello and welcome to an exclusive hour-long programme with me, Alex Belfield, talking to a man who you might not know the name of, but you've definitely heard his tunes. He's one of the most legendary composers in the business, and he's the man behind the music to the brand new Bond film. Congratulations, David Arnold.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
How cool is it to be you? Because you get to see all the showbiz stuff, you get to write great tunes, you get to do it on your own, and you hand it over to the big people, and they stick it in a film. That's nice.
It's an odd thing, the perception about what a film composer does, because, the only time actually that you're seen is when you either turn up at the premiere of your own film, which you may have been working on for 3 or 4 or 5 months, before you actually get out of your room. You have this image in front of you. You have your keyboard and equipment surrounding you. And the job is to write music for 2 minutes of this film today, knowing that I've got to write another 2 minutes tomorrow and another 2 minutes the day after. And especially with Bond, you have the idea that somehow the eye of Sauron is upon you, like the world waits with sort of bated breath, especially after Casino Royale, I think, with a huge sense of expectation about what it is that you're going to be doing. So the idea of being cool doesn't really come into it when you're sitting there with your head in your hands, for 8 hours a day thinking, I can't do it, and then all of a sudden something goes click and you realise that you can do it. But it's a very strange, isolated existence, and that's why it's so nice to get out, occasionally at the end of these things, to get out and, talk about some stuff and actually go out and sit with an audience and experience the film from a sort of punter's point of view. It's a funny thing, because like October's the sort of busy month. It seems like I've been extraordinarily productive, because I've had that How to Lose Friends and Alienate People came out last week, which I finished in February. Obviously the Bond film and Little Britain USA, which started in America. There's an awful lot of stuff kind of going on at the same time, but it's really the culmination of the best part of sort of 12 months' work.
Bond is different to everything else, isn't it, in a sense that you have to have one big song that gets released and everybody's waiting for. There aren't many films that you go, I can't wait for it to come out because there's big songs, but that's kind of the deal with Bond, isn't it?
I think, yeah. It's part of, I think, Britain's musical heritage. The idea of the Bond song obviously didn't start till From Russia with Love. Dr. No didn't have a song. It had Under the Mango Tree, but it wasn't a single and it wasn't the opening title. But From Russia with Love was written by Lionel Bart and was the first Bond song, and it was sung by Matt Monro at a time when the Beatles were kind of emerging, but the whole kind of leaving the kind of classic, perhaps swing era, the big band era, the music of the late 50s, before sort of rock and roll had really infiltrated British music. So it was on this kind of odd cusp, that John Barry kind of strode, with him being in a band, being the John Barry 7, and actually being on programs like Oh Boy, and having his own career as a performer with his own band, and making pop records, of course, with like Adam Faith. And then getting to do movie scores and being given the job of arranging the Bond theme for Dr. No, and then getting the composing gig for From Russia with Love. He kind of sort of straddled that gap and carried that forward as British music then started to have an identity of its own. Because I think before that, it was largely anonymous. But, in the 60s, we had the kind of rise of youth culture as we know it, and the idea of autonomous, pop groups who would write their own material, which was never something that ever happened before, because writers always wrote and performers always performed. But I think as a society, I think we're largely a musical society. And the idea of the Bond songs became, as the films became an event, then the songs became an event.
The Spy Who Loved Me was the film. The song was called Nobody Does It Better, and the singer was Carly Simon. We're celebrating the music of Bond today with the composer of the last 5 Bond movies. He's here with us for the hour at the Air Studios here in London. It's David Arnold talking to us about his life and career. And I just want to talk to you a bit about the movies themselves, because they were interesting in a sense that when I grew up, it was a real event to get a Bond movie. I know the last movie that you've just written for, Quantum of Solace, has been the fastest selling film of all time in Britain. Bond is still a massive brand, isn't it? And people just can't get enough of it.
In the 60s, early 70s, before you had DVDs or VHS or any way of watching these things again. The only way you would see a Bond movie is if you saw it in the cinema. And then you would take years before it came on the TV. So it also kind of had this kind of slightly mythic status, because you couldn't go back and freeze frame it and see that actually that was a stuntman, or that wasn't Sean Connery who was being thrown through that glass window. It was someone else. So, the idea that it was kind of believable and exotic, I mean, I was born in Luton, and the first film I ever saw was You Only Live Twice, and I'd never seen anything of Japan. I'd never seen anything in Dr. No of the Bahamas. I'd never seen anything of Russia, and to see all that from one's perspective in Luton it makes it incredibly sort of exotic and attractive, and that coupled with these amazingly it's obviously James Bond sounding songs. It's like it created its own world that you wanted to be a part of. But I think the songs have become there is still this huge sense of expectation. And I think that expectation comes from the fact that now, like 6 years after they released the first one, everyone has a favourite, I mean, for some people, Quantum of Solace will be the best James Bond film ever made, and the song will be the best theme song ever recorded, and Daniel Craig will be the best James Bond that ever was. And I think from that point onwards, people continue to go and see these films wanting the next one to be as good as their favourite, or hopefully better. And I think that's the charm of it, is that, I mean, I've got a few favourites, but certainly probably like You Only Live Twice and I Majesty's Secret Service are two of my favourites. And then thinking about it, perhaps From Russia With Love is. And every time you see one of these, you think, God, I wonder if it's better than that. I wonder if it's as good as that. And you're willing to give it a chance, And certainly I think there are moments in all of them where you think, oh, that was a moment that was as good as any as I've ever seen. Whether the whole film was or not, that's entirely subjective. But I just think the songs are part of our culture now, because they've been in our homes every holiday season. If it's Easter or Christmas, they were on TV. The compilation albums that come out, and now, of course, the DVD reissues. So you can actually go back and watch these things again and revisit them. There's all those kinds of things kind of contribute to the fact that there's still a huge expectation.
He's the man behind the music to the new Bond film, Quantum of Solace, which is out now. What is your initial thought when you're putting one of these songs together? Has it got to be simple enough so that people can learn it? What is your thought process?
Well, I mean, the song, when I did Tomorrow Never Dies, my first Bond film, I think in 1997, with Roger Spottiswoode with the director, he suggested that the idea of the Bond songs were a bit of a war zone. And I think he said it in an affectionate way. And I think the reason he said it was because so many people do want to do it. I guess there's so many actors would like to play James Bond. The way I look at it is that I think that you select the artist for the song as you were casting the film. There is something about the tone of the film that you're making, and the story and the characters that are involved in it, that somehow the person that you choose could exist underneath that umbrella, within that James Bond world, and almost be in the film. Now, I haven't always been able to write the title song. Tomorrow Never Dies was Sheryl Crow, but I wrote an end title song with K.D. Lang. The World Is Not Enough I did write, with lyrics by Don Black, and Garbage performed it. And for me, Shirley Manson is a Bond girl, and they did an amazing video for that song, and had all the right attitude and the right sound, and it was very kind of contemporary and modern, but it was also harked back to the kind of great the sort of big blustery kind of Goldfingery kind of songs, I suppose. And then Die Another Day was Madonna, and she did that completely on her own, and so I didn't get involved in that. And then Chris Cornell and I wrote the song for Casino Royale, You Know My Name. And so I can only really talk about the ones that I have done, that I have written. Obviously I did the scores for the other films, but with Chris and You Know My Name, I thought for the first time I want to write a song about Bond, because most of them are about the villains, or they're about the women who are want this, talking about this dangerous stranger, and where are you, and You Only Live Twice, and they're sort of like a big romantic kind of songs. So I wanted to make a song that reflected how Daniel Craig was playing the role, because at this stage I'd seen quite a lot of the film, but in the press, I don't know if you remember, there was an awful lot of sort of negativity about casting Daniel, about he was blonde, he couldn't drive a car, you know, he was afraid of guns, he couldn't swim, you know, I mean, it's like preposterous, ridiculous stuff. And we were still making the film, and all this negative press was coming out, and it was, you know, it was like everyone was getting quite angry about it, because I knew what the sort of film it was we were making, because obviously I was seeing it coming out in front of me. And it was extraordinary, the sort of response to him, and how that, as the word got out that actually he was great, that somehow that kind of changed, you know, and people started changing their minds about it. But what I liked about Daniel's portrayal of the role was that he kind of did it without looking over his shoulder, you know, and he had this incredible forward momentum, and he had this sort of incredible masculine physicality about him, and he was very sort of alpha male and unreconstructed, and he wasn't the smooth, suave, swaggering agent that, you know, that we sort of come to know from previous actors. He was a completely different kettle of fish, and I wanted to sort of represent that get out of my way kind of attitude. So I knew I wanted it to be aggressive, and I knew I wanted it to be nasty and big and darker, and not these kind of, you know, luxurious kind of velvet curtains of a record that they've had before. Which is why the idea of, like, you, and also, you know, You Know My Name is a very sort of confident thing to say. You know, it's like he's not going to say the name's Bond, James Bond. It's like, you know who I am, and I'm coming, so get out of the way. Is you know, the way I pitched it to Daniel on the stage at Prague when we were shooting was, I said, I don't want to take this the wrong way, but it's almost like, come and have a go if you think you're hard enough. You know, it's like, it's a challenge to anyone. You know, and that great last line in the chorus, which is like, you know, the coldest blood runs through my veins, you know my name, you know. So it kind of challenges you to accept him as Bond, and that's almost the way that I felt that the film had travelled, you know, in terms of how people were receiving him.
It's Alex Belfield talking to the composer of the score to the Bond films, the last 5 of them at least. I want to talk to you about your writing process now, if I may. How do you do it then? Is it words first, music first, or the other way around? How do you do it?
Well, obviously, I have to write the score for the film, and you know, for me, a lot of the time, the song forms the spine of the, you know, the skeleton perhaps of the score, and the score is built on that. And obviously, if I'm not writing the song, then that's a different challenge. But I tend to write thematic ideas either for characters or situations based on the script. So I'll get a script, and so I know what's happening in the film. I know there will be, in The World Is Not Enough, for instance, there was the character Electra King, who betrays Bond and actually turns out to be the villain, even though you think she's the love interest. So, you know, I knew I had to write a convincing sort of love theme for her, which would convince Bond that she needed protecting and he needed to kind of commit to her, therefore making the, you know, the sort of duplicity at the end even more profound. I knew that it was going to be this boat chase on the Thames at the start, so, you know, I wanted to get some ideas together for that, which was because it was kind of fun as well as exciting. I knew there was going to be Reynard, the bad guy, who was Robert Carlyle. So these situations happen in all the scripts. You know, you find out who the characters are, what their motivations are, and I will write sort of thematic ideas based on what I've read and what I think that dramatically they're like. And sometimes it works this way round, that, you know, there are elements of those writings, those thematic writings, would go to make the body of the song. So it's like, it might be that the Electra's theme, for instance, may be the verse, you know, and the bad guy's theme might become the chorus. Or on Tomorrow Never Dies, I wrote the song first and then extrapolated the thematic material from the song, and some, you know, so it depends which way round it comes. There's not really a definite method of doing it, but I like getting a couple of lines first. You know, like, it's not always a title. I mean, obviously, Casino Royale was a film that the title wasn't going to slip very happily or easily into a lyric, and also if we had made it about Casino Royale, then it would have been about a casino, you know, and I didn't want it to be about a casino. I wanted it to be about James Bond. Quantum of Solace obviously is a completely different challenge, because you've got 2 words that aren't in sort of common usage for a start, and and also they're not the sort of words that you use conversationally. I mean, I think a lot of the other Bond movies, You Only Live Twice, Live and Let Die, that you could almost imagine yourself saying those in a certain place, but I don't think anyone would ever really say Quantum of Solace, unless they're a poet. So that's a particular problem. But obviously, I knew that Jack White was writing the song for that, so in a way that was his problem and not mine. But I did have a couple of lines actually. But I think the trick for me would be like, don't put Solace at the end because there's nothing to rhyme it with,
Unless you've got a character called Wallace or something.
Well, yeah, that was the first thing actually. My daughter said, you could have Gromit and Wallace, but no, we didn't go down that route. But obviously, quantum's not a word that you could A, rhyme or B, even sing. So yeah, interesting. So yeah, Jack wrote a song called Another Way to Die and got out of it the same way that I did with Casino Royale.
And how do you know the stuff you write is any good? Is that instinct? Is that playing it back to other people? And are there just times where you write stuff and actually it is rubbish and you just have to throw it away?
Every other sort of creative person that I know, whether they're composers or editors or cinematographers, look at the work that they've done and will probably throw away 90% of it, or go back to the start 90% of the time. And I think you have to be reasonably harsh on yourself, but also very realistic about what it is that you're doing. Sometimes I'll do a draft perhaps of a piece of music for a scene, and I'll work on it until it's virtually finished, and then step back and actually watch it from dispassionately from a distance, and just feel whether or not actually it's doing the job that I want it to do. And you have to be strong enough to know when it's working and when it's not working. And through that process of kind of trying ideas, throwing ideas away, trying other ideas, you end up with a piece of music which you think is absolutely right for the scene. And I think you do have to think and know that it's absolutely right for the scene, because if a director comes along or a producer comes along and starts asking you questions about, well, why is that there and why are we doing that there? I need to have the answers to all those. And it's quite a convoluted process, the idea of what you put in a scene and where it goes, because everything has to connect to everything else. So someone might have said something, half an hour ago, which has a very definite effect on what happens in the next scene half an hour later. So a lot of the time we have to make all these connections, and whether they're little motifs or sounds or phrases or a bar or two of melody, which may be inverted or shaped or changed somehow. You have to kind of draw a almost three-dimensional emotional map of the film with music, and that involves being very aware of everything that's going on in the film at every moment, because you have to be aware of, like, I need to be aware when I'm writing this piece of music right now what has happened before, but also how's that going to set us up for what's about to happen. So it does become incredibly complicated and complex, but it does mean that at the end of the process I'm going to know the reason why every note exists, and I'm going to know the reasons why it's there and what it's doing. And so if I need to argue my corner in terms of why I think it's right for the scene, then I'll know what that argument is. Sometimes it just comes down to taste. Sometimes the director will just go, I understand exactly what it is you're saying, but can you try it a different way, because I'm not sure if I really like it. And there's a difference between intellectualizing something and just your emotional response to it. Because I can intellectualise to you about an awful lot of things, but if you just don't like it, it doesn't make any difference. GoldenEye on your favourite local radio station. It's Alex Belfield talking to the creator of the music to the Bond films here on your favourite local radio station. Thanks for joining us today. We're talking technical then. We're talking how do you do it? How do you come up with the music to these big films? My next question is, once you've written it and you've decided it's good enough and you offer it to the producers, do you have final say, or do they have the right to overrule you and say it's rubbish and write it again? Well, I mean, in film, it's a collaborative experience, and a director is pretty much the top of the tree in terms of saying what goes in the film, because his job is to direct, and if he does that properly, then hopefully there won't be too many occasions of I don't really like that, because he might have miscommunicated or misunderstood what it is that the film is actually doing. Sometimes there's a difference between the film that perhaps they'd like to have made and the film that they have made, because occasionally you'll find them trying to push you in music to do something that the film hasn't done for whatever reason, whether it's a performance or a lighting thing or just a camera movement or something just evaded the process of being captured on film. Sometimes with music they try and push you towards making it feel, I wanted this to be more romantic than it actually is, and so can music help us feel more romantic or more exciting. And sometimes it can and sometimes it can't. But my job is to score the film that's in front of me rather than the one that's in someone's head. And sometimes that's difficult for people to get their heads around as well, the fact that they actually have made something which might not be exactly what it is that you wanted. But it's the same with me with music. You know, it's like you don't really know what you've done as a piece of work until the end of it, and you can sit back and actually listen to it in one go and go, okay, now I understand what it is that's going on. Because on a day-to-day basis, doing that 2 minutes a day that we spoke about earlier, all you can concentrate on is that 2 minutes, and you know how timing your bass drum hit, so when Daniel turns his head from left to right, it's going to give it a bit more weight. You know, you get involved in the mechanics of it rather than the overall sort of emotional arc of the character. So it's so multi-layered, the experience. But a director will be the one who says ultimately yes or no, whether something happens, whether it goes in. But it is collaborative, and you do have dialogue with the directors, and you play them ideas and they'll tell you what they think about those ideas, and sometimes it's great and sometimes it's not great, and sometimes you never get to change a note, and sometimes you have to change every note. But as long at the end of the day, you know, we come up with a piece of work where everyone says this is what we're happy with, and you know, that is the job.
You took over from a man, John Barry, who is a musical legend like you are now. That must be the greatest gig in the world, and at the same time the most pressurised, high responsibility, annoying, frustrating thing to get, because you've got to be as good as he is.
Well, you realise fairly early on that, I mean, I adore John Barry. I mean, I think, you know, he was the person whose music made me interested in films in the first place. And, you know, I've got to know him over the years, and, you know, I would say that we were friends. I mean, we speak a lot, and, you know, we are planning some working together as well. And I think, obviously, you know, he casts a very mighty shadow over the entire process, because he defined the sound of that character. He also defined spy music. He created a genre of music that didn't really exist before, you know, and he's gone on subsequently to do it with that great big wide open, you know, sort of West spaces that Dances with Wolves and Out of Africa, you know, that things that, you know, whereas Elmer Bernstein might have said in like the Magnificent Seven, to have got to the spirit of the Wild West, you know, I think John Barry got to the heart of the West with Dances with Wolves, and I think that's what his music does. I think he gets to the heart and the spirit of the heart of whatever situation he's in. But I think it was always a bit of a poison chalice, because, you know, whatever you do is either, you know, the criticism I get a lot of the time is that it's either too much like John Barry or it's not enough like John Barry. You know, and you could have 100 people in a room, all of whom will have an opinion about what makes a Bond score great, and they'll all be different, and they'll all be right. And you know, the idea that, you know, that you would sit and write a line of music and think, is that as good as Goldfinger, is ridiculous, because, you know, as soon as you ask yourself that question, then the answer is definitely going to be no. You know, it can't be. So all you can really do is to write as best as you can for the film that's in front of you, and keep your fingers crossed. But I mean, I'm very aware that, you know, John's influence, and I do, you know, I doff my cap to his style frequently in the films, because I do think that is part of the experience. I think it's part of an audience's expectation when they go and see a Bond movie, is to hear that kind of sound, you know. And even though I think if you A-B'd them, I think what I do is actually quite different to John. I think at the core of it, I think the spirit of it is the same. You know, I think I adopt his, you know, perhaps the spirit of that character through his music, knowing that it's the right thing to do, because I don't think anyone's going to redefine that as well as it's been defined already, any more than you couldn't write a new theme tune for Star Wars, you know, or Jaws. You know, you just can't. It's like the sound of James Bond is the sound of John Barry, in my opinion. And whereas you can move it on a little, you know, you can move it on an inch or two, or you can add other things to it, you can make it more modern, you can reorchestrate, you can write new material, but there's something about that core sound which says, I am James Bond, and I think that's inescapable.
We're here today taping at the Air Studios, and such a legendary building. How do you keep perspective on that? Because you could easily get carried away with thinking of the millions of people who are going to hear your music in this new film. Do you just think about this studio and that's enough?
Well, I mean, when I started trying to write music for films, it was mainly for student films, and you realise fairly early on that your experience of writing is limited to being in a room by yourself with the film. And then if you're lucky, you get into a slightly bigger studio and you try and realise that music in a professional and, you know, emotional way, and to try and record the best music, the best quality music that you can have. And then it goes away from you, you know, and it's like, once it goes away from you, it becomes a part of a film, and the film is a much bigger thing. It's a bigger beast than any of the component elements, and you realise it is not just about the music. I mean, what's great about being at Air Studios is obviously one of the best studios in the world, so nothing is going to be a problem technically. Acoustically, it's all wonderful. We have the finest musicians, so there's no excuse for you to be anything other than great, you know, and the only reason it's not going to be great is if you haven't done your job properly.